The first thing I noticed was that she wasn't moving. That alone shouldn't have meant anything. The orbital station was full of beings who stood still for reasons I couldn't begin to understand. Meditative species, low-energy organisms, one particularly unsettling diplomat who only blinked once every few minutes as if conserving each blink for a special occasion. But this was different. This was deliberate. She was watching me. I tried not to react. In my experience, reacting to being watched on a station like this usually led to one of three outcomes: an awkward sales pitch, a sudden diplomatic misunderstanding, or, in one memorable case, being handed a glowing cube that screamed when I touched it. I had learned to keep walking, so I kept walking. The corridor curved slightly, its transparent wall revealing the massive swirl of the gas giant below, streaks of violet and gold folding into one another, like some cosmic painting that had gotten bored of staying still. Cargo drones hummed past my shoulder, politely avoiding collision thanks to their overly enthusiastic proximity sensors. Everything was normal, except she was still there. I could feel it, that quiet, focused attention that didn't drift or fade. It stuck to me, followed me, like a thought I hadn't finished thinking. I sighed, stopped, and turned. She hadn't moved. Up close, she looked almost human. That was the first confusing part. Soft features, wide eyes, a small frame that made her seem younger than she probably was. But then there were the ears, long, delicately pointed, curving slightly backward in a way that was too precise to be anything but intentional design. Not decorative, not symbolic, just part of her. She stared at me as if waiting for something. "Okay," I said, because apparently I had decided this was my responsibility now. This is either the beginning of a very important moment, or I'm about to get scammed in a new and creative way. No response. I crouched slightly, keeping my tone neutral. Friendly, but not overly friendly. I'd made that mistake once with a gelatinous merchant and had nearly been adopted. "Are you lost?" I asked. She tilted her head, not confused, not uncertain, just curious. Like I had said something interesting, but not particularly relevant. "Right," I muttered. "Language barrier, of course. Because the universal translator in my ear definitely isn't supposed to handle that." I tapped the small device behind my ear. It emitted a soft chirp, as if offended by my lack of faith. Still, nothing. She took a step forward, just one. It was small, careful, but deliberate enough that I instinctively leaned back a little. Not out of fear, more out of the deeply ingrained human instinct to maintain personal space, even in situations where personal space had clearly stopped being a shared concept. "Hey, okay," I said, raising a hand slightly. "We just met. Let's keep things at a respectful distance. I have a reputation to maintain. It's not a good reputation, but it's mine." She didn't stop. Another step. Now she was close enough that I could see the faint patterns in her eyes, subtle variations in color that shifted when she blinked, like light moving beneath a surface instead of reflecting off it. It was unsettling. Not in a dangerous way. More like realizing the rules you were used to didn't quite apply here. "Do you understand me?" I asked. She blinked. Then slowly she mirrored my posture. I straightened slightly. She straightened. I tilted my head. She tilted hers. I exhaled. She exhaled. Louder. I paused, staring at her. Did you just copy my sigh?" She blinked again, completely serious. I let out a short laugh before I could stop myself. "That's new. I've met species that communicate through color, through scent, through synchronized blinking, which, by the way, is as uncomfortable as it sounds. But I've never met someone who just imitates." She didn't respond, but there was something in the way she watched me that felt different now, more engaged, less like observation, more like participation. "Okay," I said, standing up fully. "Here's the situation. I have work. Very important work. Extremely important. If I don't do it, a maintenance panel somewhere will continue not being fixed, which is apparently a crisis according to people who have never fixed anything in their lives." She looked up at me, unmoving, unblinking, waiting. "You're going to follow me, aren't you?" I asked. No answer. She took another step closer. I sighed again, this time intentionally. She immediately repeated it. I rubbed my face, already feeling the beginnings of a headache. Great. Fantastic. I've been assigned a shadow, an echo, a small, quiet responsibility I absolutely did not sign up for. I started walking. For a moment, I thought that was the end of it, that she would stay there, watching someone else, becoming someone else's problem. Then I heard it. Soft footsteps. Consistent. Right behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Of course, I muttered under my breath. Why wouldn't the mysterious alien child choose me? Out of everyone on this station, she looked around and thought, yes, that one. The human who talks to broken machines and argues with vending units. The footsteps didn't stop. If anything, they matched my pace perfectly. I glanced back briefly. She was there, calm, focused, completely certain, like this had never been a question. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I didn't tell her to leave. I just kept walking, and she kept following. By the time I reached the maintenance sector, I had already tried ignoring her, walking faster, walking slower, stopping abruptly, and once, out of pure curiosity, taking a completely unnecessary detour through a corridor labeled atmospheric calibration only. None of it worked. She was still there, right behind me, matching every change in direction, like she had been quietly studying my habits for years instead of the last 10 minutes. I stopped in front of a sealed panel and crossed my arms. Okay, I said without turning around. New rule. If I stop, you stop. Silence. I turned. She was already standing still. That doesn't count, I muttered. The panel in front of me flickered with a soft blue light, waiting for authorization. I pressed my wrist against it, and the scanner hummed as it verified my identity. For a brief moment, I considered using the opportunity to slip inside and leave her outside. Then I looked down at her. She was watching the panel, her expression intent, as if memorizing the sequence of lights. I hesitated. Don't, I said, mostly to myself. Don't get attached. This is temporary. You're going to fix the panel, report the situation, and a very official-looking person will come and take her to wherever she's supposed to be. Probably somewhere important. Somewhere with rules. The panel slid open with a quiet hiss. I stepped inside. There was a half-second pause. Then soft footsteps followed me in. I didn't even bother turning around this time. Of course you did. The maintenance room was exactly what it always was. Too many cables, not enough space, and a faint smell of overheated circuits that no amount of ventilation could quite eliminate. A diagnostic console blinked impatiently in the corner, projecting a rotating schematic of the station's power grid. All right, I said, rolling up my sleeves. Let's see what kind of disaster we're dealing with today. I approached the console and began scrolling through the error logs. Lines of data streamed past. Voltage fluctuations, delayed response times, one very passive-aggressive note from an automated system that seemed personally offended by the situation. Behind me, I heard a small shift. I glanced back. She had moved closer to the wall, her gaze fixed on a bundle of exposed cables. No, I said immediately. Those are not toys. Those are very important, very dangerous. She reached out. Definitely not toys. Too late. Her fingers brushed one of the cables. There was a sharp crackle, a burst of sparks. The lights flickered. For a brief, terrifying second, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Then everything stabilized. I stared at the console. It was quieter. The error logs had stopped. The warning indicators had gone from angry red to a surprisingly calm green. I blinked. What? I tapped the screen, scrolling back through the data. The fluctuation that had been causing the issue was gone. Completely gone. Not reduced, not delayed. Just fixed. Slowly, I turned to her. She was standing exactly where she had been, her hands still slightly raised, her expression calm. Proud. I started, then stopped. She lowered her hand and looked at me expectantly, as if waiting for feedback. I let out a breath. You touched a live cable, caused a minor electrical event, and somehow solved a problem that's been annoying me for 3 days. She blinked. I pointed at her. That's not normal. She tilted her head. I sighed. I mean, nothing about this is normal, but that was especially not normal. I walked over to the cables, inspecting them carefully. There was no visible damage. No sign of tampering. It was as if the system had simply decided to behave the moment she made contact. I looked back at her. She was watching me again. That same focused attention from before. You're not just copying me, are you? I said quietly. You're learning. No response, but something in her expression shifted slightly, as if the word had meaning, even if she couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge it. I straightened, glancing around the room. Okay. New rule. You are officially not allowed to fix things. That's my job. If you keep doing that, I'm going to be out of work, and then we'll both have a problem. She stepped closer. I instinctively stepped back. She stopped. I stopped. We stood there for a moment, mirroring each other again, the faint hum of the station filling the silence. Then, without warning, she reached out and gently tapped the console. The screen flickered. A new message appeared. System optimized. I stared at it, then at her, then back at the screen. You're doing this on purpose now, aren't you? She didn't answer, but there was the slightest hint of a smile. I ran a hand through my hair, already feeling the situation slipping further out of my control. Great. Fantastic. I've been followed by a silent, mysterious alien who can fix complex systems by accident and possibly on purpose. I paused. I should probably report this. She took a small step forward. I looked down at her. She looked up at me, and for some reason, the words didn't come. Instead, I sighed. She immediately copied it, louder. I couldn't help it. I laughed. All right, I said, shaking my head. Fine. One more task, then we figure this out. I turned back to the console. Behind me, I heard her footsteps again, steady, certain, like she had already decided where she belonged, and somehow, without meaning to, I had let her decide it for me. By the fourth day, I stopped pretending she would leave, not because I had accepted it in some grand, emotional way, but because every practical attempt to separate from her had failed with a consistency that was almost impressive. I had tried taking a restricted lift. She had followed. I had tried switching work shifts. She had been there before me. At one point, I had deliberately walked into a supply closet and stayed there for a full 3 minutes, just to see if she would lose interest. When I stepped out, she was sitting on the floor outside the door, waiting. She looked up at me like this had been a perfectly reasonable arrangement. You waited, I said. She blinked. I rubbed my face. Of course you waited. Why wouldn't you wait? That would imply unpredictability, and we can't have that. She stood up immediately, falling into step beside me, as if the experiment had confirmed something important. All right, I muttered as we walked. New working theory. You're not following me. You're studying me, which is somehow worse. We passed through the central concourse where the usual mix of species moved in overlapping patterns that only made sense if you didn't think too hard about them. A tall, translucent being drifted past us, its internal structure glowing softly like a living lantern. A pair of armored traders argued over the price of something that looked suspiciously like a chair, but was probably not meant for sitting. She ignored all of it. Her attention stayed on me. That's right, I said, glancing down at her. Ignore the fascinating interstellar diversity. Focus on the human who once spent 10 minutes trying to open a door that said pull. She tilted her head slightly as if considering whether that story was accurate. It was clearly mislabeled, I added quickly. We reached the food sector, and I stopped in front of a vending unit that hummed with quiet confidence. It was one of the newer models, fully automated, capable of synthesizing meals based on nutritional needs and personal preference, or more accurately, capable of ignoring those preferences entirely and giving you whatever it felt like. All right, I said, tapping the interface. Let's test something. She stepped closer, watching the screen. I selected a standard meal, something simple, safe, unlikely to surprise me. The machine processed the request, its internal mechanisms shifting with a series of precise clicks. Then it paused. The screen flickered. For a brief moment, the display showed something I didn't recognize. Symbols, not part of any language I knew, arranged in a pattern that felt Deliberate, I frowned. That's new. Behind me, I heard a small movement. I turned. She had placed her hand lightly against the side of the machine. The humming changed. Subtle at first, then more pronounced, like the system was adjusting itself in response to something I couldn't see. Hey, I said, stepping closer. We talked about this. No fixing things, that's my job. She didn't move. The machine beeped. A compartment opened. I looked inside. It wasn't what I ordered. It wasn't anything I recognized. The meal was arranged with an almost artistic precision, colors balanced, textures layered in a way that suggested intention rather than random assembly. It looked better than anything the machine had ever produced. I picked it up cautiously. What is this? She watched me expectantly. I hesitated, then took a small bite. I froze. It was good. Not just good, impossibly good. The kind of good that made you question every other meal you had ever eaten. Flavors shifted and blended in ways that felt carefully constructed, as if the machine had somehow understood not just what I needed, but what I would enjoy. I swallowed slowly. Okay, I said, staring at the food. Now I'm concerned. She blinked. I looked at her. You touched a maintenance system. It fixed itself. You touched a vending unit. It decided to become a culinary genius. Do you see the pattern here? She tilted her head. You're the pattern, I said. She stepped closer, her gaze moving from the food to my face, as if trying to measure my reaction. I took another bite. I mean, I'm not complaining, I admitted. If this is a side effect of whatever you're doing, we might actually be onto something. She made a small sound, not quite a word, more like an attempt at one. I paused. Was that? She opened her mouth slightly, then closed it again, as if the process wasn't complete. I crouched down, lowering myself to her level. Hey, it's okay, no rush. I barely understand what I'm saying half the time. She watched me closely. I pointed at myself. Me, then at her. You. She followed the motion, her eyes narrowing slightly in concentration. Me, I repeated. She hesitated, then softly, uncertainly. Me. I blinked. That's actually impressive. I pointed at her again. You. She frowned slightly as if the distinction mattered. You, she said, the word quiet but clear. I let out a short laugh, unable to hide my surprise. Okay, that's progress. Unexpected, slightly confusing progress, but still progress. She seemed to consider that, her expression thoughtful. Then, without warning, she pointed at me again. You. I smiled. Yeah, that's me. She pointed at herself. Me. I nodded. Exactly. We stayed like that for a moment, the noise of the station fading into the background as something simple and strange settled between us. Then the vending unit behind me beeped again. I turned. The screen displayed a single line of text. User profile updated. I stared at it, then at her. You're definitely not just copying me, I said quietly. She didn't answer. But this time, she didn't need to. Because whatever she was doing, whatever she was learning, it wasn't random anymore. It was becoming something real. By the 5th day, people had started pretending not to notice. That was how I knew they were definitely noticing. It wasn't obvious at first. No alarms, no official announcements, no one walking up to me with a clipboard and a concerned expression. Instead, it was the small things, conversations that stopped half a second too early when I walked past, security drones that hovered just a little longer than necessary, a maintenance supervisor who suddenly found a reason to inspect the same corridor 3 times in 10 minutes. And through all of it, she stayed right beside me, unbothered, unimpressed, completely uninterested in the subtle tension building around us. You know, I muttered as we walked through a quieter section of the station. In most situations, this is the part where someone important shows up and asks a lot of questions. She glanced up at me. Preferably someone who was not impressed by my answers, I added. She blinked. I sighed. She immediately copied it. Stop doing that, I said, though there wasn't much conviction behind it anymore. We reached a junction where 3 corridors met, each leading to a different sector. I slowed slightly, considering my options. One led back to the maintenance area, one toward the diplomatic wing, which I avoided on principle, and one, I frowned. The third corridor was restricted, not just authorized personnel only, restricted. This one had layered security fields, subtle but unmistakable, humming faintly beneath the surface. The kind of place you didn't wander into by accident unless you were very brave, very stupid, or very lost. I turned away from it immediately. Not that way, I said. She stopped. I kept walking. Her footsteps didn't follow. I paused, then looked back. She was still standing at the junction, facing the restricted corridor. No, I said, pointing firmly in the opposite direction. We're not doing that. That's a bad idea. That's the kind of idea that gets people escorted off stations or turned into reports. She didn't move. I took a few steps back toward her. Hey, look at me. There are plenty of places on this station where we can exist without causing problems. That corridor is not one of them. She glanced at me briefly, then back at the corridor, and then, without hesitation, she started walking toward it. Of course, I muttered, following her. Why would anything be simple? Hey, I called out, lowering my voice as we approached the first security field. You can't just walk into... She passed through it. No resistance, no alarm, nothing. I stopped just short of the boundary, staring at the faint shimmer in the air. That's not how that works. I looked around quickly. No guards, no drones, no sudden lockdown. The station continued as if nothing had happened. She had already reached the next section, turning slightly to look back at me. Waiting. You're kidding, I said under my breath. I hesitated for exactly 2 seconds. Then I stepped forward. The field passed over me like a soft breeze. No alarms. No consequences. I blinked. Okay, now I'm officially concerned. She continued walking, calm and steady, as if this path was the most natural thing in the world. I followed, my mind racing. Restricted areas didn't just let people in, especially not me. I had once been denied access to a storage locker because my clearance level was described as optimistically irrelevant, and yet here I was, walking through layers of security that should have stopped me instantly. This is bad, I said quietly. This is very bad. This is the kind of situation where I accidentally become part of something important, and I don't like that. She glanced back at me again. I prefer small problems, I added. Broken panels, mildly aggressive vending machines. Not whatever this is. The corridor opened into a wider space, the lighting softer, more controlled. The architecture shifted subtly, cleaner lines, smoother surfaces, everything arranged with a precision that felt intentional rather than functional. This wasn't maintenance. This wasn't public access. This was something else. I slowed, my instincts finally catching up with the situation. All right, this is where we stop. We turn around, we go back, and we pretend none of this happened. She stopped. For a moment, I thought she might actually listen. Then she turned to face me fully. Her expression was different. Not curious, not playful, focused, serious in a way I hadn't seen before. She stepped closer. I didn't move. She reached out, placing her hand lightly against my arm. The same way she had touched the console, the vending unit, the systems she didn't understand, and yet somehow did. I felt it immediately. Not pain, not even discomfort, just awareness, like something was aligning, adjusting, recognizing. I pulled my arm back slightly, more out of surprise than fear. Okay, that's new. I'm adding that to the list of things you're not supposed to do. She didn't react. She simply watched me, her gaze steady. Then she pointed, past me, deeper into the corridor. I turned slowly. At the far end, barely visible through the soft light, stood a set of doors unlike anything I had seen on the station. They weren't marked, weren't labeled, but there was something about them that made everything else feel secondary, important, final. No, I said immediately. Absolutely not. That's definitely where the situation gets worse. She took a step forward. I stayed where I was. She stopped, looked back at me, waiting. I exhaled slowly. She copied it, this time quieter, almost encouraging. I stared at her for a moment, then shook my head. a small, disbelieving smile forming despite everything. "You're unbelievable. Do you know that?" She blinked. I glanced at the doors again, then back at her. "One look," I said. "We take one look, realize it's a terrible idea, and leave." She didn't answer, but she didn't need to, because she had already turned and started walking. And, like every time before, I followed. The doors didn't open immediately. That alone should have reassured me. For once, something was behaving normally, refusing access, ignoring us, maintaining the comforting illusion that there were still rules in this place. I stopped a few steps away, folding my arms as if that would somehow reinforce the decision I had already made. "See," I said. "Closed, sealed, very official. This is the universe telling us to go back and rethink our life choices." She stood beside me, looking at the surface of the doors as if they were not an obstacle, but a question. "Exactly," I continued. "We leave. We go somewhere safe, preferably somewhere with food that doesn't secretly judge me." She stepped forward. I didn't move. Her hand lifted slowly, the same careful motion I had seen before. No hesitation, no doubt. She placed her palm against the center of the door. Nothing happened. I exhaled, relieved. There we go. Finally, something. The surface shifted, not with a sound, not with a mechanical response, but with a quiet, almost organic adjustment. Patterns I hadn't noticed before began to emerge, faint lines of light tracing outward from where her hand rested. They spread across the door in intricate formations, like something recognizing itself. "Oh," I said, "that's less reassuring." The lines brightened. A low hum filled the corridor, not loud but deep enough that I felt it more than heard it. I took a step back. "Okay, that's definitely not standard station behavior. I'm fairly confident this isn't even in the manual." She didn't move. The light intensified for a brief moment. Then the doors opened, smoothly, silently, like they had been waiting. I stared at the opening, my brain trying to catch up with what had just happened. Right, of course they did. Why wouldn't they open? That would imply limitations, and we've clearly moved past that. She stepped inside. I hesitated. For a long moment I considered turning around, walking away, pretending I had never seen any of this. It would have been the smart choice, the safe choice. Instead I sighed. She immediately echoed it from inside the room. "You're doing that on purpose now," I muttered as I followed her in. The space beyond the doors was nothing like the rest of the station. It wasn't larger, not exactly, but it felt different. The walls curved in ways that didn't quite align with the architecture outside, and the light, soft, ambient, seemed to come from everywhere at once. There were no visible consoles, no obvious machinery, yet the entire room hummed with quiet activity, like a system that didn't need to show how it worked. "All right," I said slowly, turning in place. "This is officially above my pay grade." She moved further into the room, her steps steady, familiar. I watched her carefully. "You've been here before." She didn't answer, but she didn't hesitate either. At the center of the room stood a structure, circular, slightly elevated, its surface smooth and unmarked. It didn't look like a device. It looked intentional, like it served a purpose that didn't need explaining. She approached it. I stayed where I was. "No, no, no. We're not touching mysterious central structures. That's how stories start, and not the good kind." She placed her hand on it. I closed my eyes briefly. "Of course you did." The reaction was immediate. The surface beneath her hand lit up, patterns forming, similar to the doors but more complex, more intricate. The light spread outward, covering the structure, then extending into the floor, the walls, the air itself. I opened my eyes. The room had changed, not physically but perceptually. Layers of information appeared, faint but visible, shapes, symbols, shifting configurations that seemed to exist just beyond normal sight. "I don't understand any of this," I said quietly. She turned to look at me. Then she pointed. At me. I frowned. "No, I'm not part of this. I'm just here. Accidentally, repeatedly." She took a step closer, her gaze focused. Then slowly, she reached out again. Wait, I said, instinctively stepping back. Let's not. Her hand touched my arm. The world shifted. Not dramatically, not violently. Just enough that everything suddenly felt clearer. The patterns in the room sharpened, the shapes aligning into something that almost made sense. Almost. I blinked, trying to process it. Okay, that's definitely new. She watched me closely. I looked around again, my mind struggling to keep up. You're showing me something. She didn't respond, but the patterns reacted. Subtle changes, movements that felt directed. I pointed at the structure. This is a system, not like the others. Not mechanical, something else. She tilted her head slightly. I let out a slow breath. And somehow, you're connected to it. She didn't deny it, didn't confirm it either. She simply stood there, calm, certain. Like this was the most natural thing in the universe. I laughed quietly, the sound almost lost in the hum of the room. You know, a few days ago, my biggest problem was a faulty panel and a vending machine that hated me. She blinked. I gestured around us. Now I'm standing in a place that probably shouldn't exist, trying to understand a system I can't even fully see because a mysterious alien decided I was interesting. She stepped closer again. I didn't move this time. I'm starting to think you didn't choose me by accident, I said. She looked up at me. And for the first time, she didn't imitate. She didn't copy. She just held my gaze, as if waiting for me to understand something I hadn't quite reached yet. And somehow that was more unsettling than everything else combined. The room didn't go back to normal. That was the first problem. I blinked a few times, expecting the strange patterns to fade, the layered shapes to dissolve back into walls and floors I could understand. Instead, they stayed, subtle, shifting, like a second version of reality, quietly insisting on being noticed. All right, I said slowly, turning in a small circle. Either I've just been upgraded or something is very wrong with me. She watched me. Of course she did. You did this, I added, pointing vaguely in her direction. This is definitely your fault. I was perfectly normal before you started touching things. She tilted her head. I sighed. She didn't copy it this time. That alone was enough to make me pause. You stopped, I said. She didn't react. I narrowed my eyes slightly. No copying, no echoing, just watching. For some reason, that made everything feel more serious. I looked back at the center structure. The patterns flowing across it were clearer now, forming sequences that almost resembled logic, connections, pathways, something structured beneath the surface. I hesitated, searching for the right words. I think this is some kind of interface. She didn't move. Not like a console, I continued. Not something you operate with commands. Something that responds, adapts. I stepped closer to it, cautiously this time. And you, I glanced at her. You're not just using it. You're part of it. She blinked slowly. Not confirmation, not denial, just acknowledgement. I rubbed my chin. That's a lot to process for someone who still occasionally argues with automatic doors. I reached out, stopping just short of the surface. If this thing reacts to contact. Before I could finish, the room shifted again. Not visually, spatially. The distance between me and the structure felt shorter. I froze. I didn't touch it. She stepped closer. The shift stabilized. Okay, I said carefully. So it's not just touch. It's proximity, or intention, or, I paused, frowning, something I don't have a word for yet. She moved beside me, her presence steady. The patterns responded immediately, aligning slightly, like a system recalibrating. I glanced at her. You're guiding it. She looked at the structure, then at me. Then slowly she reached out, not to the structure this time, but to me. I tensed. We talked about this. Her hand rested lightly on my sleeve. The world didn't shift this time. Instead, something else did. The patterns became clearer, not sharper, clearer. Like my mind had finally caught up to what I was seeing. I inhaled slowly. Oh, it wasn't random. It wasn't abstract. It was information. Not written, not spoken, but structured in a way that felt understandable, barely. I squinted at one of the shifting forms. That's a pathway. Energy flow, maybe, or communication. She watched me carefully. I pointed to another. And no, wait, that's not connected the way I thought. The pattern adjusted slightly. I blinked. Did you just correct me? She tilted her head. You did, I said, a small smile forming despite everything. You're actually helping. I stepped closer, more confident now. Okay, if this is a system, then it has a purpose. And if it has a purpose, then... The room dimmed. Not completely. Just enough that the pattern stood out more. I stopped. That's not me, right? She didn't answer. Of course she didn't. A new sequence formed at the center of the structure. Larger, more defined. It pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. I stared at it. That looks important. She nodded. Actually nodded. I froze for half a second. You're starting to respond. She pointed at the sequence. I stepped closer. All right, important glowing pattern. No pressure. I reached out, hesitating just before contact. Okay, I muttered. If this opens a portal or activates something or turns me into whatever this system thinks I should be, I'm blaming you. She blinked. I took that as permission. I touched the surface. The reaction was immediate. The pattern expanded, light flowing outward, filling the room. The structures around us shifted again, aligning into something more cohesive, more complete. I felt it this time. Not just awareness, connection. Like I had just stepped into a network that had been waiting for input. I pulled my hand back slightly. Okay, that's definitely something. She stepped closer, her gaze focused on the center. The pattern changed again, simplified, condensed, until only a single symbol remained. I stared at it. I don't understand, I said. She looked at me. Then slowly she spoke. Not an imitation, not an echo. A word. Home. I froze. The room went quiet. Even the hum faded, as if the system itself was listening. I looked at her, my thoughts scrambling to catch up. You just... She pointed at the symbol. Home, she repeated, more certain this time. I turned back to the structure. The symbol pulsed once. Slow, steady. I swallowed. This place, it's yours. She didn't respond, but she didn't need to, because for the first time since this started, I wasn't guessing anymore. I was beginning to understand, and that made everything infinitely more complicated. The symbol didn't disappear. It stayed there, pulsing slowly, like the room itself had settled on a single, undeniable truth. I stared at it longer than I probably should have, as if it might suddenly explain everything in a way that required no effort on my part. It didn't. Home, I repeated under my breath. Right, that's simple, clear, definitely not hiding anything complicated at all. She stood beside me watching, not the symbol this time, but me. I glanced down at her. You know, when people say home, it usually comes with things like explanations, context, maybe a helpful guide. She blinked. I sighed. She didn't copy it. I noticed that again. You've changed, I said quietly. She didn't react, but she didn't need to, because I had changed too. A few days ago, I would have walked away from this, or tried to. I would have reported it, avoided it, found a way to make it someone else's responsibility. That was how you survived on a place like this. Stay small, stay unnoticed. Don't get involved in things that looked important. And this, I looked around the room at the shifting patterns, the silent system that had let me in without question. This was important. All right, I said, straightening slightly. So this is your home, or part of it, which means you're not lost. Which means I've been wrong about that from the beginning. She stepped closer. I smiled faintly. You could have told me. She raised a hand slightly, then lowered it again, as if the gesture itself wasn't enough anymore. Footsteps echoed from the corridor. I froze. Please tell me that's not exactly what I think it is. She turned toward the entrance. The doors opened. This time not for us. Figures stepped inside. tall, composed, their presence controlled in a way that made the entire room feel smaller. Their features were similar to hers, human-like, with those same long, elegant ears. But everything about them carried weight, authority, precision. And then she entered. I didn't need an introduction. I didn't need a title. The moment she stepped forward, the room itself seemed to acknowledge her. The Queen. She looked at the child first, not me. Her gaze softened, just slightly before shifting, to me, and suddenly I was very aware of every decision I had made over the past few days. Okay, I said quietly. This is the part where I explain everything, and it somehow sounds worse than it actually is. No one responded. Of course not. I cleared my throat. In my defense, she followed me first. Silence, I nodded. Right, not a strong opening. The Queen stepped closer, her eyes never leaving mine. There was no hostility in her expression, but there was something else, something deeper, more measured. I held her gaze, resisting the very strong urge to look anywhere else. She's been with you, the Queen said. Her voice was calm, precise, and perfectly understandable. I blinked. You speak. Of course you do. That makes sense. That would have been helpful earlier. The Queen didn't react to that. She chose you, she continued. I hesitated. I was under the impression that I didn't have much say in that. A pause, then, unexpectedly, the smallest shift in her expression. Not quite amusement, but close. I glanced down at the girl. You could have mentioned that part. She looked up at me, calm as ever. The Queen stepped closer to the center structure, the patterns in the room responding immediately to her presence. They aligned, sharpened, as if recognizing a higher level of authority. She has never done this before, the Queen said. I frowned slightly. Followed someone around and fixed things by accident? Connected, she clarified. I looked at the structure, then at the girl, then back at the Queen. No, that was worse. She is learning, the Queen continued, and through her, you have been allowed to see what others cannot. I let out a slow breath. That explains a few things. Not all of them, but a few. The Queen studied me carefully. You did not reject her. I shrugged slightly. She was hard to ignore. A pause, then quietly. Most would have. I glanced at the girl again. Most people don't get followed by someone who copies their size and improves vending machines. She made a small sound at that, almost like a suppressed laugh. I smiled. There it is. I was starting to think I imagined that. The Queen's gaze softened again, just slightly. This bond, she said, was not intended, but it is valuable. I shifted my weight. That sounds important, and also slightly concerning. It is both. I nodded. Of course it is. The room fell into a quieter stillness, the kind that didn't feel tense anymore. Just settled. Complete. I looked at the girl. So, what happens now? She didn't answer. The Queen did. She returns with me. I felt that more than I expected. A small, unexpected weight. I nodded slowly. That makes sense. It's where she belongs. The girl stepped closer. I hesitated, then crouched slightly, meeting her gaze. Hey, you'll be fine. You were always fine. I was just temporary. She reached out, placing her hand against my arm one last time. No shift, no system response. Just contact. I smiled faintly. Yeah, I'm going to miss that too. She looked at me, her expression steady. Then softly, You. I blinked, then laughed quietly. Still working on that, huh? The Queen stepped forward, and the girl moved to her side. The connection, whatever it had been, settled into something quieter. Not gone, just changed. I stood there as they turned to leave, the room dimming slightly as if acknowledging the end of something. At the threshold, the Queen paused. She looked back at me. For what you have done, she said, you will not be forgotten. I scratched the back of my neck. I was hoping for something slightly less permanent, but I'll take it. That almost smile again. Then they were gone. The doors closed, the patterns faded, and just like that, it was over. I stood there for a moment, staring at the now quiet structure. Well, I muttered. That was definitely not in the job description. The room didn't respond. Of course it didn't. I exhaled slowly. No echo this time. I walked back toward the exit, the station slowly returning to something familiar, something manageable, but not the same. Because now I knew. Sometimes the smallest, strangest connections weren't accidents. They were beginnings. And whether I liked it or not, I had been part of one.